what does it take to become a prolific author? And more importantly, I guess, become a prolific author that actually sells books. I'm not going to talk about the art of selling the books per se today, but more so, how do you become prolific? What is the process? What is the process from, say, ideation over to publication? As you'll hear me mention that a couple times throughout this next interview with a good friend of mine, Kevin Tumlinson. Now, you might recognize Kevin Tumlinson. He is the marketing director of Drafted Digital, but he's not here again to talk about publishing today. We're focused a little bit more on the writing craft and getting it to where you can take that idea, put it onto paper, really massage it, refine it, and then you have a wonderful manuscript. So we're going to dive deep here with prolific thriller author Kevin Tumlinson. Pantser, plotter, or a mixture of both? Why?
I am 100% a pantser because that is just what I've done my entire career. When I was coming up as a professional copywriter, I didn't have time to plot things out and figure out, what I needed to say and how I needed to say it. I had to come up with, 50 taglines in the next 20 minutes. So I have basically trained my brain to think like that, think rapidly, and essentially outline as I write.
Wow. So you still have, to a certain extent, some type of an outline when you're going into things.
Not really.
Okay.
Not really.
So what
do you mean by outline? When I say outline as I write, so when I was in film and TV, we would write a treatment, okay? And when I started doing video production, I would do sort of the same thing, where rather than outline the story we were going to tell, I would write basically the whole thing out in a sort of prose block of text. And I would figure the story out as I went, and then I could always go back and edit and tweak, right? So that was a way for me to rapidly produce copy or produce a script, and I carried that over to my fiction writing or all my writing. All my writing is like this, right? I do a stream of consciousness onto the page, knowing that if I screw up, I can go back and edit and fix. And I used to be really bad about editing, but I've come to love it. So when I say I outline as I go, what I mean is that whole document, it could function as the outline for itself when it's said and done. I am essentially plotting as I write, plotting during the writing process rather than before the writing process. Does that make sense?
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. This is so deep. I'm going to probably go a little bit into the weeds. I have a set of questions ready, but...
The weeds is where I live and play golf, so let's do it.
This is... golf. So take me, what inspires you? What gets that idea in your head? I know it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but what is it for you? Is it do you have meditation sessions, or do you wake up from a nightmare and I got a great idea? Or is this something it just hits you? Eureka, I have it.
So every book I have ever written, save for maybe 1.5% of them, started as a title. Okay? So I write the title, and then I write the book to the title. And then I know that's a weird kind of thing, but what happens for me is that encapsulates the story for me. It gives me a starting point and something to aspire to in the story. So where I take inspiration is in daily life. So if as I'm reading novels or nonfiction books, I read a lot of nonfiction, or I'm watching something on YouTube, or I'm watching a film, or just walking around in the world. Little scraps of things will sort of filter into my sort of realm of attention, right? And that becomes grist for the mill. It's all those little pieces are out there floating around, and I kind of capture them like krill, basically. And eventually it gets digested, and what happens is an idea starts to form. And a lot of times what happens, so like I said, I start with a title for my books, but a lot of times what happens is I've encountered 2 or 3 things that somehow through synchronicity feel like they belong together. And so I'll combine all those things into the book, right? So I was, one of my most recent Dan Kotler books, that's my archaeological thrillers. It's called The Demon Core. And that was literally, I'm tooling around on YouTube and it suggested a video about the Demon Core, which was the third unused plutonium core from World War II. It didn't get dropped on Japan. And so it ended up in Los Alamos being experimented on, and it killed a couple of scientists because they were morons. And if you want the full story of that, go look this up, Demon Core. So it got the nickname Demon Core because it basically kept killing people. Well, I thought, well, that's just the coolest name. I mean, how can I not use that as a title?
Yeah.
And so I've got the backstory of this core in Los Alamos, but I also had this whole series of things about various scientists and their habits and who was happy about being at Los Alamos and who was not. And I had all these little bits and pieces from different experiences, you know? And so then I had read Richard Feynman's, I think it's called Surely You Jest, Richard Feynman, or something like that. It was like an autobiography or a collection of his work. I don't even remember. But he was known to be a practical joker, you know? So I'm like, okay, well, these are, it's like that scene in Avengers Endgame when they realized that all the stones were in New York at the same time at one point. That's what happens to me. I realize that there's all these pieces and they'll all fit together if I do it right, hold my jaw just right. And that's really kind of the origins. I mean, all my ideas come in that way. I'm walking around as a filter to the world, and everything that gets caught in the filter becomes grist for that mill.
How are you tracking these type of ideas? Are you just keeping them up here in the old memory bank, or do you have like notes or some type of a notepad?
My entire life I have tried to keep an idea journal, and I've got dozens. But here's what happens. The funny thing that happens to me is once it's written down in an idea journal, I never see it again. I never use it. I rarely ever revisit it and use it. And I think that's part, I hate to come off sounding like one of these, like the idea of being creative is actually somehow, this like esoteric, spiritual kind of thing. I don't actually feel like it's necessarily like that in all respects. In some respects, yes, but it's not. I do hold to this idea, though, that once an idea has been expressed in some way, that's pretty much it for that idea. Like that's why I try not to talk about my books when I'm writing them, tell people the plot or any of that stuff, or work through things. That's why I don't outline. Because if I outline, the idea is now there as an outline, and it's very difficult for me to go back and write the book. And so all that creative energy gets focused on expressing the idea. And if I can express it in a sentence instead of a book, then I probably will. So I purposefully don't do that.
So I imagine you probably have a lot of ideas floating around in your head that eventually kind of merge together in some capacity, become almost like a Frankenstein story. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My first thriller, the Coelho Medallion, right? Or Coelho Medallion, depending on whether or not you speak Portuguese. That started off as a dare. Nick Thacker dared me to write that book when we were we had a show called Self-Publishing Answers. And I took that dare and didn't really know how to write a thriller at the time. And so what I did was take a bunch of what I called my thirds, which are bits and pieces of books and stories that I had started but never finished. So I keep all of those, right? And so I took like a handful of those and said, okay, so here's pieces. If I were to weld these things together, what kind of Frankenstein creature would I create, and what would happen from there? And that actually was the origin of that book, was taking these disparate pieces, jamming them together, and then nourishing what was born from it. And so, when I first released that book, there was originally an opening scene in it. So I did these like little vignettes in a prologue. And there was one of them that I just never felt like it fit entirely. It did and it didn't. It actually was the origin of the idea of the river, an underground river that would rise and fall periodically and seasonally. But the nature of that scene didn't quite work for the rest of the book, so I actually pulled it in a later edition and made it like bonus material at the end. So, but because of that little piece that was in it, they all had the idea of the river, and that actually fed an entire, a plot twist in the book. So, yeah, I have all these pieces, all these components. Most of the time, it's all just floating around in my head, or it comes from a conversation. A lot of conversations with Nick Thacker and Ernie Dempsey lead to books. A lot of inside jokes that we have lead to books. Like, the second book in that series is called The Atlantis Riddle, and that came from a joke between me and Nick Thacker because A.G. Riddle's Atlantis series, right? I'm like, well, I could call a book The Atlantis Riddle and just capitalize on that guy's fame. And so that was a joke, but then I wrote the book because, it's a great title. So anyway. Yeah, I will ramble, by the way, if you don't rein me in. But
no, I'm loving this. This is fantastic. I think this is perfect time, actually, for me to segue over into, like, what does your entire writing process look like? Let's just take me from ideation to final manuscript.
So the ideation step is pretty much as we described it. Like I start with kind of starts with a mishmash of ideas, but really nothing solidifies until I have a title. And 99% of the time, I start a book because I had a title. Like I'll just be tripping along in the world and Demon Core pops into my head, and I decide I'm going to write a book called Demon Core. And so that's the start. That's the ideation step. From there, so it's a put your butt in the seat process for me. I sit down every day and write. And I typically have like a minimum word count that I aim for. And that can change from time to time. It changed while we were on the road full time to something a little less than what it used to be. But I typically will aim for at least 2,000 words. And so the process is I've got my title, right? I open up Scrivener, which is my book writing tool of choice. I used to write in Microsoft Word, and I've written in like Google Docs. And I've used all the word processors, but I love the formatting. I love the way Scrivener allows me to be nonlinear in the way I produce a book. But I open a new book. I don't even use their templates. I just open a blank document, and I, depending on the series I'm writing, I may write a prologue. The Kotler books always have prologues. I know there are people who are against prologues, but to me, it's the equivalent of a cold open from a TV series. So if you ever watched a show like Castle, for example, or some of these crime shows and stuff, they have a cold open where there's an unrelated, there's an unrelated scene, there's a related scene, but it's unrelated characters, right? Generally to the protagonist and the main characters. And then they set up a story that becomes part of the A story in the rest of the book. Now, I like to do those cold opens or prologues in my Kotler books, but in my other books, I generally just start in the middle of the action somewhere and just start writing. And because I have a word count that I'm aiming for, I write until I hit that word count. It doesn't really matter what I'm writing. It's ridiculous, but it's never trash. I mean, I used to be very concerned that what I was writing was garbage, and that I'd have to fix it. But, after years of doing this and going back to, quote, fix it, I've realized that very little actually needs to be fixed beyond the mechanics of things, the typos and maybe the odd grammatical error. But I write, so let's say my word count for a day is 2,000 words. I'm going to aim for 2,000 words. That seems to be common right now. So, and I'll go higher usually, but so I'll write those 2,000 words, and then I'm done. Okay, I sometimes I get in the zone and I want to keep writing, and I will if I've got the time or if I've got nothing else on my plate. I will certainly do that. But then the next day, before I begin my next writing session, I do what I call looping, which is I stole this from Dean Wesley Smith. He calls it cycling. And he cycles back 500 words. Every 500 words, he cycles back, reads and edits and rewrites, and then continues going. And I think that's a great process. But I loop. I loop back to the previous day's word count.
Okay.
Read, edit, rewrite, whatever I need to do. Add to. Generally, I add words. It's funny, but I do that, and then I've got the momentum to write the next 2,000 words. But I also count any words I write in the rewrite as part of the 2,000, if that's my goal. Yeah. So if my target for the day is 2,000 words, and I add 500 words during rewrite, now I've got 1,500 additional words to write, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the mechanics of the process. And once I've got the book. Well, I should say that sometimes I'll come to what they call the muddy middle, where I'm halfway through the story and I've spun out and I don't know where to take it. And that's especially a problem if you're a pantser, because you don't have an outline to fall back on. But I've even done it whenever I was outlining. I did the same thing, because even knowing where I wanted to end up, there would be a point at which I didn't know how to go from, point L to M or whatever. Did I get the alphabet right there?
You're good so far.
Yeah. So I didn't, and if I didn't know how to do that, the best thing for me would be to loop all the way back to the beginning and do another pass, a read and rewrite again. And by the time I get to that new section, everything is refreshed and my energy's there. I've got momentum, and I push on through and I write the rest of the book. It's happened like that for me with almost every book.
Wow.
And so once I've got that done, and I do the major loop back again, do another read and rewrite for the whole book. Then I'll run that through. I used to run it through Grammarly, a whole series. I have what I call my edit stack. So it would be Word, Grammarly, Pro Writing Aid, and then
the only reason I'm laughing, that's my same exact workflow.
Yeah. So, and I typically do that with as many different options as I have. But I stopped using Grammarly for a while. I haven't used that for quite a while, but I don't know why. I guess because I felt like Pro Writing Aid had gotten to a point where it was good enough to help me do the things that Grammarly was helping me do.
Yeah,
so,
pretty stellar.
Yeah, I really enjoy it, and I love those guys at Pro Writing Aid. I've done some stuff with them in the past, blog posts and things. So if you don't use it, you should use it.
This episode is not sponsored by Pro Writing Aid.
Not sponsored by Pro Writing Aid.
But we still strongly recommend it.
I will, yeah. And I'm pretty good about recommending things I use and love. So you can at least count on I'm not BSing you about whether or not I think it's good. But once I've got the manuscript as clean as my edit stack will make it, I give it to my street team, beta readers, basically.
Okay.
And I give them a timeline, and I'm pretty strict about it. But I say, look, I'm setting up the book as you receive this book. I am setting up the pre-order for it, and then I get that going, and I give them the time frame. I need the book back by this date so that I can make your edits and changes, so that I can release the book on time, and they always deliver. So yeah, that's kind of the end-to-end process. And I do use pre-order a lot because it gives me an opportunity to discount the book for my reading list, which I do like to do as a reward for being on the list. You get the bonus of cheaper books, and then on the day of the release, I set the price to full price, and so when I get the sales from that, and it creates that sort of halo effect, the money I get from there is much higher than what I got from the pre-order. So that's my little marketing trick. But
nice.
Anyway, that's
good insights.
Did I hit all the notes you wanted there? Because
no, I really loved the whole looping back philosophy, because there's been times, like usually 90% of the time, I could come back to my manuscript so long as it's the next day and it's still fresh in my mind and I've got momentum in my favor. But there are some times where I just come in and I just stare at the screen and I'm like, what was I talking about before?
Where was I going with this?
It's almost like walking into the other room. You're like, what did I come in here for? and you don't know, so you just go back to the other room empty-handed. Oh, that's right, I meant to go pick up a spoon. Well, silly me.
I think it was Hemingway who would stop mid-sentence. He'd stop typing I think it was Hemingway. He would just stop mid-sentence, and that way when he came back the next day, he'd have to complete the sentence, which created that momentum. And I think that's really sort of the same trick.
Yeah.
You know, the goal is you want to weight things in such a way, you want to stack things in such a way that you have no choice but to go back so that you can ramp up and you have that runway of a sentence or 500 words or 2,000 words or the entire book, whatever it takes. But you know, that's how you get past. That's why I've never had writer's block, by the way. Like, I barely understand what writer's block is supposed to be honest with you. And I know people are throwing things at me right now, but
they've unsubscribed and everything from me too.
Screw this guy.
There are some people that truly have it, and I think you have the knack for storytelling. I want to wrap up the podcast here. One last question. I didn't even touch 50 others, so you're just gonna have to come back. That's it.
I'm sorry. I told you, man. I will soak up every minute. Yeah.
Briefly share some advice that you would give to an aspiring fiction author who's breaking into the business.
So there's two things that will make or break every author, and you've heard them a million times, and so this isn't anything new, but you should read everything and you should write often. Read everything you get your hands on, and read it for its enjoyment first. Don't read everything in terms of I need to learn from this. Read everything for its enjoyment first, and then analyze it second. But the more fiction you read, and broadly, read in your genre, but read as broadly as you can, because you never know what little pieces you're going to pick up and learn from that. And then it is the writing side of this is the most important side, but it's the thing that gets done the least by writers. But I tell writers, and I've done this from the start. I have a book, 30-Day Author. I say this in that book, and that book's like 1,000,000 years old. But treat every scrap of writing you do as practice. So text messages, emails, social media posts, if you're writing a grocery list, do it as if it's going to be preserved for the ages. Like, everything you write, put your 100% soul into it and make it. You don't have to make it Shakespeare. It doesn't have to always sound flowery or high intellect or anything, but it should be grammatically correct, and spelling should be correct, and the words should not be truncated, and you need to use that time, that experience, to help perfect your skill, because that's what's going to make the difference for you. And if you get into that habit, if you're in the habit of reading and you're in the habit of writing regularly, whatever your goals are, set a goal of word count, page count, or number of days you've written, whatever goal works for you. If you're doing that regularly, you will improve. That whole adage about the first 1,000,000 words are practice is absolutely correct as far as it goes. The first 1,000,000 words are practice, but you'll get those 1,000,000 words from everywhere. They don't have to be you sitting in front of your computer in a Starbucks, knocking out the next great novel. Use all of it. Use everything you've been given.
Big thank you over to Kevin again for taking some time out of his day. I have no doubt he'll probably be back to this channel to show a little bit of support to Kevin. Go on over to kevintumlinson.com and get yourself signed up to his email newsletter and pick up a couple of books while you're at it. Till next week, this has been Self-Publishing with Dale, and I'll join you then with another interview.